What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. I'm going to let you in on my little secret on how I work on trigger control and what's made me a better shooter on every single firearms platform. Alright, so this is my compound bow. It is a Hoyt Pro Defiant, and the reason that I think that this has given me an edge in firearms shooting is the fact that everything that you do in terms of trigger control with a handgun or a rifle or shotgun, what have you, is amplified on the archery platform. So there are a lot of things that go into shooting a compound bow, and I'm not exactly a guru by any means, but I'm pretty decent with the bow. I shoot out to about 80, 90 yards at the most, which I know most people, they top out at like 20 or 30 yards, but look to the guys like John Dudley for advice in terms of how to set up your bow and so on and so forth. I'm going to give you a breakdown of how my bow is set up, just to give you an idea of the things that I've taken from him specifically that translates to this bow. So first and foremost, again, this is a Hoyt Pro Defiant. It doesn't matter what bow you purchase. Any bow that you can set up appropriately is going to give you an edge in terms of learning the fundamentals of shooting, trigger control, and so on. So this one is set at 80 pounds. I have a QAD drop away rest on here, a Hogfather sight. It is a single pin. I like the single pin. It keeps my target clear. There is multi-pin sights where you would have 20, 30, 40, 50 yards, etc. However, I think that makes your target muddled and it blocks out some light. I prefer to have the single pin, and then there is a dial adjustment on here to go up or down. If I set it for 20, 30, 40, or 50 yards, the pin shifts accordingly. I have a 12-inch Bee Stinger stabilizer on the front. I also have a back bar. It's not on here right now. That just adds some weight out to the front and then out to the side to give you a little bit of stability. When you are in that drawn position, things can kind of get a little off balance. It just gives you some weight forward so that it keeps everything steady and level. If you have too light of a setup out front, you tend to get a little shaky and that pin's dancing all over the place. Not super important, but I do have this little tripod set up on here. That's key if you guys want to get a lot of reps in. What it does is it allows you to be able to sit your bow down on the ground like this. Be careful of not damaging your cam, so don't set it on concrete or anything like that. I've got a little pad here on the floor in the garage just for that purpose. But if you guys are putting a lot of reps in, you don't want to hold your bow between every shot. You want to let your shoulder kind of relax, and I'm able to sit that down, take a break, adjust, so on and so forth. Now there's a lot of release aids out in the market. If you guys aren't privy to it, if this is your first time looking into compound archery or archery in general, there is a release aid that goes along with it so you're not shooting with fingers. If you're going to shoot a traditional bow like a long bow or recurve bow, by all means shoot fingers with that. If you're going to shoot a compound bow, however, I would advise that you do get a release. I shoot a standard trigger release. It has a cam in it, so at a very light touch, it will break over. Now, that has helped me immensely in terms of my trigger control with a pistol, rifle, what have you. Because again, everything that you do with a compound bow amplifies what you would do with a firearm. So if you are dropping your shot, checking this to make sure it's clear, if you are dropping your shot with a pistol and you break the trigger over, you might not notice a lot of drop. If you do so with the bow, you're gonna notice 3, 4, 5 inches, could be below the target, you might miss altogether. So you have to be very purposeful in that trigger break so that you don't have any kind of dip in your shot when you break that trigger over. Now there are a lot of releases on the market. There are back tension, there are thumb release. However, again, I like this standard index finger trigger release just because I think it works for me, and then it translates into the firearms world where I'm focusing on making that very crisp, purposeful trigger release to where I'm not jerking the trigger, I'm not anticipating it too much, I'm just breaking it over, I'm getting that crisp, clean shot without dropping or pulling off to the left or moving the bow in any sort of way that's going to alter the flight of the arrow. Speaking of which, let's go over the arrow. I believe that's the most important factor into your entire archery setup. You could buy an inexpensive bow and just focus on getting a good arrow paired with it, and you're going to be better than an expensive bow that has a cheapo arrow or just anything that the guy at the store says, okay, buy these, it'll work, whatever. I'm not going to go into all the details of how to set up your bow. I'm going to leave that to the professionals like John Dudley. However, I will say FOC or front of center is important. I like to shoot a heavier arrow. Heavier is obviously going to fly a little bit slower, but slower means it's going to be more forgiving. And in my opinion, forgiving means that it's going to shoot straighter for me personally. So FOC or front of center means that it's heavier in the front than it is in the center or going back. So this arrow is about 480 grains, I believe, which with an 80-pound bow is going to give me about 280 feet per second. Now, a lot of archery talk that you're going to see in advertisements is going to say this bow shoots super fast or this crossbow shoots super fast. Now, I want to dispel a little bit of a myth, whereas speed is not everything in archery. If you start with a fast bow, you can add a heavier arrow and get a good, heavy, front of center arrow moving quickly to wherever you're going to get on your target and it's not super slow. However, I wouldn't say, get a fast shooting bow and then pair it with the lightest arrow possible so that it can shoot as fast as possible. That's just not ideal. One, it's not going to track well, it's not going to be as forgiving, and two, the kinetic energy that then hits the target is not going to be as effective as a heavier arrow is going to be. With that being said, I shoot an Easton FMJ. I have 50 grains of brass in the insert as opposed to aluminum. I shoot a 100 grain field point and then a 100 grain broadhead. I use the expandable broadheads, which you can shoot fixed, you can shoot expandable. Check your game laws if you guys are into hunting. That's obviously important. Not that it matters, but I shoot the Rage 2-blade if I'm going to be deer hunting or something like that. And then in terms of fletchings, a lot of times they're going to come with the glued-on fletchings. Once those buzz off, I use a heat shrink type fletching where they're called quick fletch, which essentially the entire thing comes on a sleeve. You slide it over there, put it down in boiling water, and it shrink wraps onto the arrow. Those are key. So just as important as the FOC is the spine of the arrow. In terms of how heavy of a bow you're shooting, that's going to correspond with the appropriate arrow spine that you have. Now that's going to have a range to it. So what I like to do is find the spine range that's best for my weight bow and my speed of bow, and then get as heavy front of center as I can. But the heavier you go, the more flex you get in the arrow. If you get too much flex, it's not going to fly properly. So you want to make sure that you get that proper FOC or front of center weight to where it's not going to mess up the spine of your arrow and it's not going to be too stiff. Too much flex and too stiff is going to mess up the flight. Talk to your local archery shop. They can give you some great advice on that, I'm sure. And there's a lot of forums online where you can also source information. But FOC is very important. A heavy arrow is important. I would say if you get in the ballpark of 280 feet per second, you guys are going to be doing just fine in terms of target shooting, or if you're shooting for game, hunting, etc. and so on. So I'll just give you a little rundown of the features of my setup and how I think that's translated into being successful in terms of making accurate hits and then those translating into the firearms world. So for me, it's been a single pin sight, a drop away rest, a good heavy arrow that has a good front of center, a good stabilizer to give me that good steady platform so I can make consistent accurate hits, and then a good release aid like this Scott Little Goose, which has a cam system in it and a very light brake on the trigger itself. So again, this has translated into me being far more accurate in terms of firearms. In fact, this past year, I spent a little bit of time with my 308 bolt gun that I used to hunt with. However, I didn't get as much range time as I wanted to, but then come deer season, I had a fantastic buck step out in front of me, and I had to shoot offhand because I didn't have a rest available. And I think that my archery training and shooting all year long translated into a great shot on that buck. And I'll show you guys a picture here in just a second. But again, get into archery. When you guys get out there and get those reps in, I guarantee you those reps will translate into better, efficient trigger control with your firearms. So again, thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, comment down below. And as always, guys, keep shooting.